Rocket Riders of the 27th Century proudly brings to you Spunk, a short story about pilot Faust first meeting the Honshu crew and how she came to be a part of it. Written by Michael Moreau, narrated by Mark Roddy.
My very first steps were on the deck plates of a rocket, sir.
Emily Faust was not lying. Clad in an adorable little gingham dress, she had clumsily made her way across the cold steel floor of her father's tug to be scooped up by his proud arms. Those arms were so strong. Her father was a man that had given her the only type of life he knew, that of a pilot. 18 years had passed since those first awkward steps, and what stood before the captain of the RS Honshu was a bright and capable young lady who seemed so eager that he thought she might squirm right out of her flight suit. "Have a seat," Herdor Tarsik commanded the young lady. He was a large man, large enough to intimidate every other pilot candidate that had sat at his table throughout the evening. What he failed to realize was that this petite young blonde sitting across from him in this seedy port bar on Vega Nova had been raised by a loving father easily as big as a man as he was. Rather than find a big spacer intimidating, she found it somehow strangely comforting. That and his eyes. Something in his eyes seemed kind. Quick to bloody a nose or two if it was appropriate, but there was no hint of genuine malice behind those deep brown eyes. He seemed cool, calculating, but at the ready to erupt like a volcano should anyone threaten him or his own. "So you're a boomer?"
No, sir. I was born on Gradient 7.
The big man cracked a smile and lightly pounded his fist on the table. "Gradient 7? Nothing but a bunch of farmers. How'd you end up on a rock 900 light years distant?" She attempted a modest smile.
Like I said, sir, I'm a pilot. Have been since the age of 7. My father was from the Alpha Centauri system, but he joined the service and did 10 years or so before he met my mother on Gradian and settled down.
Tarsik's smile widened. "I can't see a spacer getting himself grounded on a planet like that. Too much wide open space for me." He paused for a moment and then continued his questioning. "How'd you end up in space? Your father get antsy?" He watched as the pretty girl hung her head. He instantly knew what she was going to say and regretted having ever poked fun at her.
My mother, she had a congenital heart defect that no one knew about until it took her. She was still very young.
"I am so sorry. I didn't mean to."
You didn't know. She shook her head. You wanted to know about my background, so it's okay. She died when I was only a few months old, and my father wasn't able to make a living driving tractors. He sold the house, bought a creaky old space tug, and started doing in-system work to keep us fed. As long as I can remember, I've been looking out of windows at the stars. Can't stay planet-bound for long. Like you said, I get antsy.
Tarsik was astounded. Sure, some folks were born in space and spent a large chunk of their life there, but they were usually boomers aboard deep-range colony ships. This girl had grown up on a tug that likely had no more than 100 square meters of living space. That must have been some life growing up there on a small ship like that.
We got around. By the time I was 5, he'd saved up enough money for us to sell the old bucket and hitch a trip to a more populated system. He bought a new tug and went back to work, but there were dozens of planets, moons, depots, outposts, and space stations for us to visit that we did a lot of exploring. We made friends at a lot of the ports we worked. We did really well, the two of us.
"But you're here now. Should I be afraid to ask why?" She shook her head.
No, he's still alive. Went back to Alpha Centauri 2 to take care of my grandmother.
She neglected to mention that he'd come down with a degenerative neuromuscular condition and that both he and his mother were in a nursing facility. Those arms, once so big and strong, were now feeble, and she hated seeing him that way. She'd went with him at first and declared that she would stay and take care of him, but he knew that space was in her blood. With a tear in his eye, he demanded that she get out and explore the galaxy. "Join a ship in the service," he said. "That's where the real adventure is." With a heavy heart, she had departed Alpha Centauri 2 with her 3 dueling sons on a foggy morning via a long-range passenger rocket. First, there'd been Planet Shepard. A meeting in a bar had led to a brief stint aboard the RS Danube as her junior pilot. The wench that ran the ship never once let Emily take the helm. On the largest moon of planet Hydas, she was offered a job piloting an interplanetary shuttle and jumped at the chance to at least actually fly something. After 6 months of ferrying tourists back and forth from the planet to the resorts on her moons, however, Faust had had enough. That brought her to Vega Nova. Word was that the Honshu's pilot was leaving the service to get married and settle down. The only problem was that she apparently was not the only person to have heard the word. She'd waited behind no less than 12 other candidates, and there was at least 3 more eyeing her angrily from the bar area. "Any experience flying an old IPC Type 7? He asked bluntly after taking a sip from his drink. She knew she had to be honest. Tarsik seemed like the kind of man who was good at reading people.
"Once, sir. I took one from orbital dry dock to a scrapyard to be decommissioned."
He smiled and laughed just a bit. "That's where most of them are now. The Honshu is one of the few left still flying. You could have been to every corner of the galaxy and more, like I have, and still never seen a Type 7 in as great a condition as she is."
"I've heard, sir."
"No doubt." He took another sip as she began to notice that his eyes kept darting toward the far corner of the room. At what, she wasn't certain. "Seems that everyone within a dozen parsecs has heard of me and my ship."
"Oh yes, Captain. You've got a reputation as an honest and trustworthy man who runs a tight ship."
Tarsik tried to chuckle, but he kept glancing at something behind her. "I don't know about a tight ship, but I do try to keep my business in order. I'm very serious about what I do, Miss Faust. But you would know all about that. You and your father kept your own affairs in order, it seems."
"Absolutely, sir."
She trailed off as he began to become visibly tense. Suddenly, someone came walking up behind him, a Martian. Tarsik couldn't help but notice that Faust rose ever so slightly from her chair, as if to defend him, when the stranger put his hand on the captain's shoulder. The lights in the bar, apparently some type of UV lighting, were causing the Martian's eyes to glow like blue fire. She relaxed as the captain turned to the stranger and leaned in so that they could speak. She watched as he shook his head a few times in acknowledgement, and then the Martian walked away. "That was my first officer, Mr. Ensel. I'm sorry."
"Emily,"
she clarified. He nodded. "We're going to have to cut this short," and he stood to leave. The look of surprise must have been apparent on her face.
"Did I do something wrong? I'm very interested in this job, sir."
He leaned in close to her. "And I still want to talk to you. Come by the ship in the morning. I'm sure you can find the huge blue rocket parked near here. In the meantime, I suggest you get out of here. Something very bad is about to go down."
"Is this some kind of test?"
is what ran through her mind. But even not knowing the man, she could see in his demeanor that this was not a game.
"Sorry to be so bold, Captain, but what makes you think I'd run from a fight?"
He looked down at her with a small grin as she rose from the chair. "Because you seem to be a fairly intelligent young lady."
"Lady? Is that it? A fight is no place for a lady?"
The spacer was taken aback. He sensed the tension between his crew and the Mercadian junkers they'd had a run-in with not too long ago rising, and he knew that any minute fists were going to start flying, but this brash young lady was just full of surprises. On the other side of the bar, nearest the card tables, one of his foolhardy auxiliary crewmen, Odijo Marshall, bumped into one of the junkers on purpose and spilled his drink. "Human scum!" The alien screamed through his proboscis-like mouth and smashed the glass against Marshall's head. With no warning at all, the Mercadian produced a hidden and obviously undetectable Derringer, and with a single shot through the heart, dropped Marshall to the ground. Panic broke out instantly. Most of the patrons not associated with the junkers or the Honshu bolted for the exits immediately, but a few liquored-up old spacers decided to stick around for the fight. With the swift move, one of them, likely a serviceman himself, grabbed the alien's hand and broke it against his knee. The Mercadian screeched in pain, but was silenced when the heavily bearded old space dog smashed his elbow into the junker's face. That was it. Like a recreation from some of the old films Tarsik has seen as a child, the entire bar broke out into one giant fight scene. Chairs went flying, bodies the same. Low music that had been playing was gone, now replaced with the wet smacking sound of fists meeting faces. Tarsik flipped the table and pulled himself and Emily down behind it. "I really appreciate that you want to help. I do," he said sincerely. "But right now, this is for my crew and I to deal with." He went to stand up, but she grabbed him by the cape. Being as sizable as he was, he nearly pulled her to her feet before feeling the weight and kneeling down once again.
"I want to be a part of that crew, Captain, and scrapes like this are part of that job. Let me help."
He looked around and found a nearby chair which he grabbed and proceeded to snap 2 of the old-time wooden legs off of. "Never take chances," he stated as he handed one of them to her. "First rule of serving with me, Faust, your ship and your crew come first. Anyone tries to hurt either, and there's no such thing as playing fair. Got that?" She nodded in approval. A sly grin crossed her lips.
"Yes, sir."
The 2 of them bolted from their cover, Faust nearly getting caught in the face with the flying bar stool in the process. There must have been 50 of the damned junkers in the bar, and only about a dozen or so of the Honshu's crew had been allowed to tag along. Luckily, the bellicose old space dogs that had stuck around for the fight were pretty much universally fighting on their side. Broken glass crunched under Faust and Tarsik's boots as they strode forward. One junker tried to rush the captain with a broken bottle, but one swipe of his chair-leg club and Tarsik left the alien bleeding on the floor. Another, who'd just been tossed over a table by some unnamed and scarred-up spacer, now found himself face-to-face with Faust. He swung a clawed hand right at Faust's delicate face, but she dodged and moved deftly. The spacer who'd tossed him in the first place then kicked the table, which plowed right into the alien's back, and while he was still reeling in pain, Faust dropped him with a hard kick to the sternum. Tarsik looked over at the pretty young pilot and smiled. She indeed had a little fight in her. His thoughts were quickly interrupted, though, as one of the Mercadians, normally light as a feather but heavy with a spacesuit on, jumped from one of the tables onto the captain's back. The alien's claws ripped at the already tattered yellow cape that Tarsik wore. The captain tried in vain to punch the alien's slender head, but it was too fast. Faust turned to help, but was grabbed from behind by another Mercadian who had come out of the shadows. Another, who'd just dropped the table-kicking spacer with a chair across the face, ran up and punched the young pilot right in the stomach. Tarsik could hear Faust call out, but he had his own problem to deal with first. Rather than simply let herself be beaten to a pulp, Emily fought back. She lifted her weight back into the alien that was holding her from behind and tossed both of her legs high into the air. She grabbed the attacking Mercadian's head between her boots and with all of her might slammed his head sideways into the nearby table. Tired of playing around, Tarsik decided on a rather simple plan of attack. He threw himself backwards and could hear the junker yelp before they even hit the ground. In a crash, all 300 pounds of surly servicemen crushed the breath out of the alien attacker. Tarsik felt the Mercadian's grip go slack, and without even bothering to check on the status of his opponent, he jumped to his feet. He surveyed the scene quickly. Several crewmen were tussling with some junkers in the far corner. One spacer had one of the aliens on the floor and was choking the life out of it with his muscular hands. And Ensel had just cut one of them to ribbons with his Cossack blade. There were 3 more junkers staring him down, but Tarsik figured they'd think twice before attacking the Martian after seeing what he'd just done to their friend. Faust. To his surprise, he looked over to see one of the Mercadians on the ground at her feet bleeding profusely from some unseen head wound, but there was still one holding her arms from behind. The alien looked up in a start as it suddenly saw Tarsik and released its hold on her right arm as it reached for something tucked into its belt. Faust took advantage of the opportunity and started elbow smashing the junker in the ribs, but its bulky spacesuit dampened the vast majority of her blows. Tarsik dashed forward thinking that the alien was going for a knife. Faust got a clear look at what it was that the Mercadian was reaching for as it leveled it at the captain. It was another one of those derringers that had gotten past the bar's firearm scanners. Without thinking, she lifted her arm as high as she could and smashed her elbow back into the alien's face. Its grip on her released and she turned to face it. Clutching at its right eye, it again pointed the weapon, not at her, but at the larger of the 2 immediate threats, Captain Tarsik. With all of her weight on her back right foot, she didn't have time to switch stance and disarm the junker properly. Instead, Emily had to kick with her left leg and her aim was off. Instead of knocking the gun from the attacker's hand, she only shifted his aim. Tarsik watched as a small red bolt fired from the tip of the tiny weapon and tore into Faust's left shoulder. Like an attacking tiger of old Earth, the captain sprung forward and crashed into the alien. He grabbed the hand with the gun and slammed it against the wall so hard that he was sure he heard bones break, even over the commotion of the fight still raging in the background. The alien's eyes locked with Tarsik's and lit up with terror. It knew that it was fully at the mercy of this enormous man. The captain was not in the mood to be merciful. Faust, grabbing at the intense pain in her shoulder, watched as the captain hoisted the Mercadian clear over his head and tossed it through a nearby window. "You okay, Faust?" the big spacer asked as he came running up to the pilot.
"Yeah, it just grazed me. Hurts like hell, though."
Tarsik wanted to crack a smile, but was interrupted by a flying bar stool. He slammed Faust to the floor and blocked it with his own back. It hurt quite badly, but only fueled his anger. With a single kick, he lifted one of the tables off the ground, grabbed hold of it, and tossed it back at the junker that had thrown the stool. The alien was faster than he'd anticipated and nearly dodged it. Nearly. It caught the attacker's legs and pinned him to the ground. Tarsik, noticing the battle was winding down, walked over and gave a quick, breathtaking stomp to the junker's chest just to make sure he wouldn't get up again. As he looked around, Ensel and the others seemed to have the situation in control.
So,
Faust moaned. Tarsik turned his attention back to the young pilot.
Do I still have to come find you with the big blue rocket in the morning, or do I just get the damn job?
This time the captain couldn't help but break a huge smile as he extended his thick hand to help her up. Considering the condition of this bar, I'd say it's the best we depart sooner than in the morning. As he got to her feet, he put his arm around her. Kid, you just took a shot for me. If you can get the Honshu off the ground, you've got the job. She tried to think of something to say, but could only smile. Besides, he continued, if you're not any good, we can always put you off at the next port with the rough bar scene. She half smirked at that. It would be some time before she'd get a full grip on the captain's sense of humor. The end.